Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, all the way from, and I'm not sure, it used to be New York, USA, which is what my research tells me, but you've moved to Colombia, I believe. So we'll get clarification of that in a moment. But let me introduce Juliana Marulanda. She's the founder and CEO of Scale Time, where she and her team create ways to free up at least 30 hours per week for her clients so that they can have successful agencies that run without them. Great sort of tagline there. So welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Juliana. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I am currently in Colombia and probably inching my way towards Europe. So
Oh, wow.
more on that in the future.
Yeah, excellent. And traveler. So there's another thing that Scale Time does. It helps you become location independent.
Absolutely.
Now, Tanya Alvarez, who was our guest on episode 581 of the Innova.Buzz podcast, introduced us. So big hello to Tanya.
Oh yeah, of course. She and I have actually traveled quite a bit. And
Yeah.
are very good friends and colleagues.
Excellent. Yeah, and we had a wonderful conversation with her on that episode 581. There it is. All right.
Lovely.
Now, I indicated what Scale Time does. The focus is on helping agency owners design high-performance teams, high-performance systems, and high-performance processes so they can indeed free up their time to do other things like spend more time with their family or travel or start a second business or whatever it might be that they decide to do once they've got some additional time on their hands. And I'm really excited to talk to you some more about some of the ways that we can all achieve that. But before we do that, Juliana, what's the impact you're making in the world today?
I would like to say that the impact that I am making in the world is helping individuals and owners have more freedom of choice. Um, I think for agency owners, for leaders of organizations, I think the word freedom gets tossed around a lot. Like, we're going to create freedom of geographic independence, freedom to do what we want, freedom. And oftentimes it's not the individuals who are going to go and spend like a month in Bali that we tend to work with. Although we could do that. But it's having the freedom of, oh wow, I want to be able to get my kid elite tutoring or equestrian classes, right? It's having the choice to say, well, I want to live half of the year here and half of the year there, or I want to take the month of August off, right? It's what are those things that truly make you happy, and being able to do that not only from a financial perspective but also from a time perspective.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And something you said there kind of prompted me to think, yeah, people are thinking about this a little bit wrong. There is all this talk about freedom, and time and attention are the non-renewable resources we have, and how can we focus on those resources? Money is a renewable resource, so how do we grow money, and how do we become financially free? Because then we'll have more time and we'll be able to focus our attention on things that we want to be doing, but we kind of don't do because we think we need to earn more money and so on. But the one thing you said there that I thought, if we change our mindset and say, well, choice, what are the choices we need to be making? What are the choices we can be making? What are the options we have? And hey, we are free to make any choice we want. So yeah, talk to us a little bit more about that shift in mindset from looking at choices rather than like thinking of it of money and freedom of time and so on.
I think choice is such an important part of the human experience. I think. I don't know. Um, I think it was at one point where it's. I think for me, it's about individuals having more choice, and I think choice gives us power, as opposed to control. I know this is gonna get very meta, which was not the angle I thought we were gonna go in.
Yeah.
Where I usually am talking about systems, but it's, I think as owners, right, depending on where you are in your maturity level, like there's so much need for control, right? In the beginning, usually, like if you're under 500K and, or even under 250K, um, USD, euro, more or less, um, you're, you're trying to make sure that your quality is good, right? And usually you are the delivery mechanism. And
Mm,
so there's so much need to, figure out what your offer is and control the outcome. It's like, oh, okay, I want to make sure that the quality is good. We're going to control the outcome. And then if you want to grow bigger and, maybe you have some freelancers, um, now you're like, okay, we need to control the quality, right? And so there's that, like, okay, and how do we do that? And I think um that mindset of control often limits us, right?
mm,
um and I'm a big believer that if you have good systems, if you have good process, right, if you have a good system to recruit good people, right, and maintain them and make sure that they're performing and you have metrics in place, um then it's less about having control and more about having factors that are there to stabilize and give you the outcome that you want, right? Because at the end of the day, what people want is to make sure that their reputation's intact, that they're doing good work, and that their clients are staying or coming back, right, referring them, and that they can get new clients. And so, by being able to let go of control, we actually gain a lot more power. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that the quality is still in place, right? And so, and then once you're like, if you, it's usually a dash to cash to the million, and then at like 1.3, it's like now you have managers, and so it's like you have less control, right? Because now it's like, do you control the managers that are controlling the people, right? Like it's
yeah.
like this whole, it's like a game of telephone, but it's like a game of control, right? And then you're like, oh my God, I'm paying these people. Like now I'm paying them so much money, but like they're not doing what I want them to do, or they're not doing it, or like now I'm doing their job, right? Because I'm not getting the outcomes I want, but I'm still trying to control everything, right?
Mm,
And so I I really have thought about this a lot. And for me, it's about like, how do we let go of control in
yeah.
order to gain power? And in order to do that, we have to be really clear about the choices that we want to make. Right. And I
Mm,
think that's where the freedom of choice comes in. Right. Like, do you actually want to break the million because you want to make more money, or because you want to create a bigger impact, or because you want to have a really great team and you want to be able to like be that person that's able to sustain them, right? Like you really care about your team, you want to grow them, you want them to be happy in a place and environment that you didn't get to have while you were maybe growing up in the corporate world.
yeah.
And so these are the choices that we make, because your take home between 250K and a million actually doesn't change that much. Sometimes it goes down because you're
Mm,
reinvesting into the business, you're reinvesting your salary, to make sure that you get to that point. And so these are the choices that we have, right? So if you want freedom, in quotation marks, for those of you who cannot see me, like, what does that really mean? And what are the choices we're making?
mm. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. And it's interesting you talked about control, because thinking back to I love the explanation. I wish I had that years ago when I was in the corporate world and we were building systems for our research division, how to come up with new products and take them from an idea all the way through to successful commercialization. And we actually had processes that we developed for every step of that journey, which is quite a long journey. And one of the challenges that we always faced was, particularly in the research division, the researchers and the people coming up with the ideas and doing the experiments, was these processes are going to they're going to control us. They're going to take away our creativity. They're going to take away our ability to innovate. And I was always one to say, no, they're not. They're going to take away the tedious decisions that you have to make, and they're going to take away the mental capacity you need to remember, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that to get to the next step. They're going to take all that away and free up mental capacity, which you can then invest back into generating new ideas to feed into the beginning of that process. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, if anyone subscribes to the idea of like decision fatigue, right? Or if you have, it's like, I forget how many decisions we make in a day. And, by the end of the day, you're tired, which is why they say that the worst decisions are made at like 2 a.m., right? It's like you're too tired. You're like, this is add alcohol, you're making some bad decisions. But you're right. So decision fatigue is a thing. And so if you can remove decision fatigue, right, and as you said, if you can amplify and increase your ability to have less cognitive load, you have so much more capacity to innovate. And we work with so many creatives, right? And they're like, oh man, structure, like you're gonna take away my freedom, you're gonna take away my my creativity. And oftentimes it's not the creativity that's being processed out, it's all the menial crap that nobody wants to do anyway, right? So it's like, okay, well, let's reduce this so you have more time for creativity.
Yeah, it's almost a paradox, isn't it? Where people sort of come from this mindset of, oh, I'm suddenly being constrained or controlled, to use your word, or now I have to do it this way. But it's exactly what you said. It's taking away the menial tasks that's actually occupying time and brain power that could be better used elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So talk to us a little bit about your philosophy of building processes. And I know we'll get onto the idea of AI, generative language models, and use in processes. I'm really keen to hear more about that from you, because I've gotten really excited about what AI can do, but I haven't really married it up with processes yet. So I'm actually writing some processes about how to use it in certain situations, but actually using it for writing processes is something I'm really keen to learn more about. But talk to us a little bit more about fundamentally the philosophy that you use for writing processes, developing processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so one of the, I would say, like, of the key principles of any process is to create, standardize, and then optimize, right? People are very geeked out on technology and automation and AI, right? Like, and I really put all of that in the category of optimization, right?
Yeah.
Because you you can't really optimize a process you don't have, right? And like, it's just hard, right? Because if not, you're just gonna have and one of my clients is like, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, you can't and before you optimize a process, we got to get it standard, right? Is it adopted by the team? Is it being used consistently? Does it work consistently? Is it producing the outcomes that we want consistently, right? And then before then, we actually have to create it. And by create, I mean put to paper, right? Because a process, there's tons of processes that exist in an organization, in people's heads. And so, until we can plug you in and download your brain, and maybe feed it to an AI algorithm, right, an MLM, we actually need to like download that process so that other people can use it and we can get that standardization and then we can optimize, right? So kind of just first principle is create, standardize, optimize. I always say it. And I think it's really fundamental. It's very simple, but it's one of the things where I think it's really important that people just remember and actually act upon. And I think it's also very liberating, because if you're working, let's say you're scaling very quickly, and people want to like geek out on optimization sometimes. It's like, don't go there. Just get standardization across the board, right? Because if you're working, let's say, on your client onboarding and maybe your project management and maybe you have a new offer that you've got to standardize, right? Like we want to get everything to a playing field where it's repeatable and scalable before we start adding massive optimization, which is great. I mean, I love optimization. Like I can live in optimization all day long, but it doesn't work if we don't really work the system. And so I would say that's the main thing. And then, if you want me to kind of delve deeper into like, okay, how do we actually download someone's brain, or how do we create processes, I'm happy to kind of go into my thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I love it. I love the overview, the create, standardize, and then optimize. And often I get people saying, because I do a lot with automations, and then people saying, can we automate this? And I say, well, what's your system? What do you mean? Well, how do you do it now? Well, it depends who does it. And sometimes I do this and sometimes I do that. And I say, well, we can't automate that. So let's document the system first, and then let's get it working manually consistently. So yeah, so I'll use your explanation from now on.
Awesome. Feel free.
Excellent.
Yes. And I would also say, depending on the maturity level of the business, right? Sometimes you have offers or, things or processes in your business that are really standardized, or like if you're beginning, you're just kind of like throwing spaghetti. You might have different things. So I would say, go and see what's working, what's profitable, what's making you money, what you're enjoying, right? Because sometimes these things are not mutually exclusive. So, and then standardize for your average, right? Because if you try to standardize for everything, you can't, right? You want to sort of 80-20 that rule and say, okay, well, 80% of the time, this is what we're doing, this is what works. And then you can have deviations or rules about when it doesn't work or when you're breaking your own process, which as owners, we do all the time. It's like, team, do this, but I'm going to go, make a hard left and go do that. And when you do that, like I often say, build criteria around that. Right? Are you breaking the process because, you have a legacy client, you have a built-in relationship, and maybe they're your like best friend? Okay, that makes sense, right? Or, or someone who maybe isn't paying you as much, but they're like your referral rainmaker. And so you consistently want to make them happy, right? So create criteria as to why you're breaking your own rules. And now we can understand, or at least the team can understand your decision-making.
Yeah, that's such a valuable advice, and often we kind of break the rule because we figure, I can take a shortcut here, or we've got this inbuilt need for a bit of variety. So okay, I'm going to do this different just for the hell of it. But that's kind of sending all the wrong signals, isn't it?
Yeah, we're just gonna break stuff because we're bored. So
yeah. All right. Well, you talked about the idea of downloading your brain or downloading someone's brain. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I mean, I see a couple of scenarios here. I see the one scenario where somebody's developed some expertise. It's kind of like it's just ingrained in them. So they do things and it's almost automatic for them. So they're actually not conscious of specific steps that they take, which they would need to describe if someone else were to do this process that's not an expert in doing it. But then there's the other thing, which may be unconscious, maybe even conscious, which is the person saying, well, as long as I'm the only one that can do this, they need me.
Oh, so, yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about downloading the brain, and maybe touch on those two things.
Okay, I'll talk about the process hostage in a moment. So Okay, so one of the things that I would say also is that building processes in an organization is a team sport, right? Like, don't try to do it yourself. If you're the owner, don't do it by yourself, because you'll never get it done,
Hmm.
unless your employee zero and you're hiring employee one, right? Then you have to, but there's ways to cut that so that it's not um as awful as it sounds. Right?
Yeah.
um and find your subject matter expert. Like, who is the subject matter expert, right? Because when we're building processes, in effect, we're really creating training, right? We're like, okay,
Hmm.
this is how you're going to do something, right? We want to develop it so that people can follow along, you can track it, and then also you can train someone. Because
Hmm.
even if you hire someone that's excellent, and let's say you hire someone excellent from a competitive organization, right? You may not necessarily want their bad habits,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you might want them to do things the way that you want them to be done.
Hmm.
So even if you're hiring someone that is phenomenal, they still have to go through things. They might be able to go through it faster, but you still want them to have, that tribal knowledge that is part of your organization, your secret sauce, whatever's yielding the results that makes you so special. Um, so having said that, how do we create processes, right? So I am very big on video.
Hmm.
And the reason why I'm big on video is because we can slice dice, and replicate and then turn these into processes later on, right? So it's like you get a 2 for or 3 for 1 with video. So one is, let's say there's not a subject matter expert in your organization, right? Like, let's say you're like, we are, you know, we're doing one offer, right? And we want to add another offer. And we have someone who's really smart in our team, and they learn very quickly. And we're like, this person could do it because everything I throw at them, they learn and they do, right? And so, in that case, you can just buy training, right? Buy
Hmm.
training, take that individual who's becoming a subject matter expert and say, okay, take that training and now dilute that into a process, right? Um, give me the step by step, workflow. And then let's put that workflow to use, right? Let's create it. Let's run it a couple of times. Let's standardize it and see if it works, right? So step one is you just buy the process. And then there's also tons of people out there selling, like, here's my insert this offer in a box, for
Hmm.
$9.99, right? Like there's tons of processes and checklists and swipe files and documentation and training that you can buy, right? That's one step if you don't have the subject matter expertise in your organization. Now, for most of your listeners, I think there is subject matter expertise in the organization. So what do we do then? Um, so if you have the time, right, and you actually can build out some of the processes before you hire someone, or if you have someone in your organization that has a subject matter expertise, you have an employee, you have a contractor sometimes, right? Like, you might have a
Hmm.
freelancer, and you're like, okay, we need to download their brains. um, the easiest way is to get that individual, whether it's you or somebody else, to do a video. And there's tons of note-taking apps now with video, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing the video and the transcription at the same time, right? Because that's just going to save you loads and loads of time as you're doing this, and then you're putting this into a process, right? Now, what is a process, right? um, Process is a sequence of, actions and steps for a derived result. Um, and I like processes in a couple of formats. One, I like it in checklist formats so that we can put them in project management tools, so that, we can template them out and we're like, okay, here's an offer. Here's our client onboarding. Here's our recruiting process. Here is, how we offboard a client, which is often an overlooked process,
Mm.
right? Here is how we offboard an employee, a team member, a contractor. If you hire someone from, a gig economy site, like how do you offload them in that site, right? So we want to be able to have these repeatable templates in a project management system, because if you put them somewhere that is not a project management system, it's difficult to track, right? You can't track a document. And oftentimes people will put processes in like Google Docs or Dropbox or, just, Word documents, and they're not trackable. So that's hard. And then if they're not trackable and you're getting more advanced, then you can't see the capacity of your team, right? And if you can't see the capacity of your team, it's really difficult to know when and who to hire. It's also difficult to figure out who's performing and who's not, right? Who's getting the job done efficiently and who's not. So we want to be able to track it in the checklist format. And if you're doing a video with transcription, right, you're also going to have all of not just the skeleton of like, what we're doing, but also how we're doing it. Right. And so those are the pieces where I love and recommend people, create, wikis with standard operating procedures, or mini SOPs if you don't have time to like totally flesh it out, right? And if you just have the video, that's a great start, right?
Yeah.
So at least now we can get the video, we have the transcription, we can take that transcription and you can have someone very junior, or now we can use AI, and we could talk about that, to take that transcription, turn it into a checklist, put that checklist in your project management system, right? So that's why I'm a really, really big proponent of doing video with one of the note-taking apps, because you will automatically get that transcription and you're just going to get so much juice out of that 15 minutes that you're doing that video, or that half an hour that you're training someone in person. So if you have the time, do the video beforehand, right? Because you're like, okay, we're now building a library of these processes. And if you don't have the time, then instead of just doing shadowing with someone, right? Oftentimes you're like, okay, I have a new person. Oh crap, I didn't have time to train them. I'm going to train them now. Right. And so do a video where you're training them, again, with the transcription. Even if you're doing it in person, you can leave one of these video things on so that it captures the transcription. And now, even if that person's onboarding themselves, which often happens, right? It's like, okay, well, now part of your job is to, to take this and like show me that you've learned it, built out the process.
Built out the process,
Built out the process, right? So I would say those are three different ways, right? You're either buying it, you're doing it prior, and if you're doing it prior, I would say to do the process as you're doing the thing. Meaning, like, if you're onboarding a new client, wait till you have a new client and then record yourself onboarding and just kind of verbally processing what you're saying. Okay, and then we got the scope of work and we put the scope of work into, this, document, and this is how we like now create the client document, and this is now what we're going to do in our project management system. We're now going to send them a kickoff call, right? Like, and you're going to sound a little silly, and that's okay, because everyone always feels so silly when they're doing these videos. Be silly and make it dirty drafts. Make it dirty, make it silly, because it's not going to be your ultimate process, right?
Exactly.
Like, processes are always evolving. So you don't want to have these like beautiful, videos that are going to last. No. Like you want these videos to be super replaceable. And you want the next person to create the next video and have it be better.
That's such great advice. And I remember, that was when a light came on for me. I was always a process junkie, And like I mentioned earlier, writing processes, I was sort of one of the process champions in our big corporation of about 20,000 global employees. And I was known as one of the process champions. But when I started my own business and I started writing some processes and then bringing people on board and getting them to write process, and I remember talking to an early mentor of mine who was actually in the video game, and he's also a process junkie, David Jennings from Systemology. And he said to me, what I do is I video everything I do, and then I get the person that's going to be running that process that's the training material, and then they write up the process. So this was before transcription and AI was a thing. And I remember thinking, oh, that is so brilliant. And ever since then, I've been doing that. And any training I do, I basically record and say, well, there's the framework for the process. And now, of course, with the transcription, and I haven't actually done the AI, I must do that with the next thing, because I do have something I need to video as a process for a client. I'll turn that into a checklist using AI and see what happens. Because that's kind of the next evolution of it, isn't it?
It is. And it's really neat, because one of the things that I personally, always say is that AI is part of the workflow, right? It's not the entire workflow. It's not going to do the whole thing for you. And you're going to have to quality check, right? It may not be perfect, but it's going to do a really heavy lift. And one of the really amazing things about AI that it can do is process. Like it can really understand process, and it can label really well. And so, as opposed to if we were having a conversation about like AI in marketing, totally different conversation. But for operations, it really understands how to take tons of data and summarize it in linear fashion, which is exactly what we need for a step-by-step process. And so, to answer your earlier question is, if you are doing a training video, right, and then you give it to someone, you're gonna miss stuff, right? Like if you've been doing something for 20 years, there's going to be things that your brain is calculating in milliseconds that you don't even remember it's calculating, right? Because it's muscle memory. You're like, 1 + 1 = 33 because this and that, right? And so and other people are going to be like, but it equals 2. And you're like, no, it's 33. And, it's because this is what's happening in the industry. This is what's going on with the macroeconomics. This is the type of client. These are the questions that we didn't ask. This is where they're lying to us, blah, 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 right? So your brain will just know things for any subject matter expert, right? Because they're an expert. And so where we get the gaps, right? Like where the gap analysis is done is when we actually hand the process off to the next person. And they're like, oh, but why did we do this? And what happened to that? And like this, I don't understand why we press this button and not that button.
From there to there? Yeah.
And so that gap, it's what's missing in the actual training and or process. And so we use that feedback loop to standardize, right? That's part of the creating and standardize. There's a feedback loop in which we're handing it off to someone else. And now oftentimes what's missing is criteria, right? Like, okay, well, to get from this step to that step, right? I made these decisions based on this criteria. This is why, right? And that's how we get from here to here. And because, and then over there from, the way that we get from P to Q is because blah, 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 right? And so knowing initially, and that's why those dirty drafts are so important. Right? You're not going to get, and like the smarter you are, the worse they are, right? So it's like,
and also why it's hugely valuable to do the dirty draft rather than spend a lot of time refining it and producing a fantastic video, because there's going to be gaps in it. So you're going to have to redo it or edit it heavily to fill in those gaps. and it's going to take forever to actually get done, and it may not ever get done because the barrier is just too big to do that big production. Whereas if you just do the quick and dirty, go through and then come back, okay, I need to do another quick and dirty because there's this big jump in logic that I've done and it's obvious to me, but it's not going to be obvious to anybody else.
Exactly. And chunk them down, right? Like chunk down the process into 10 to 15 increments. So that way, if you have to redo something, right? If you have to redo a part of the process, you're like, oh wow, that did not work. Or, or something changes, right? Like an industry standard changes, an algorithm changes, because that's never happened to us before. Right? Like every 6 months. Right? Anything that changes, like you change an offer, like you're gonna have to redo that, right? Like any change is gonna cause changes in your process. And so if you chunk it down, now like you don't have to redo a 2-hour video.
Yeah,
You
that's
just
right.
have to redo a small chunk of it. And that's huge, right? And hopefully by that time, other people can redo it because they're doing it, now they're the subject matter experts. So, and like, to your question about people who hold the processes hostage. So any single time you have, interesting outlier behavior in employees and or team members, right? Whatever shape or form they take. It's always what's in it for them. Right? So, and it's like, what's in it for you? Right? So part of it is like, okay, well, in order to get promoted, right? Or in order to do more interesting, fascinating things, we need to get this off your plate eventually. Right? So let's start putting these processes in place so that we can get this off your plate, so that we can secure better, more interesting work for you, and hopefully more money. Right? So that's one that's pretty easy. Another one is we need to be able to cross train the team. Right? Someone else needs to be able to do this if you want to take a day off. Right? If you don't want me texting, calling, slacking, whatever form of interruption, then somebody else needs to learn how to do this. You can't be the only one, right? So that you can actually take time off, right? So many times, people will, they'll hold a process hostage, but then they'll complain about the fact that they can never take time off. So it's like
they get interrupted. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So it's like, we don't want to interrupt you. We want you to have fun, right? Like go get off the grid, do whatever it is that you want to do. So those are two big ones that usually work in the conversation, right? And another one is just plain like, we are, as an organization, right, we're becoming a more performance-based organization. What that means is that we're having standard operating procedures. We want to grow. We want you to grow with us. And now this is just a part of the gig. Part of the job is that, everyone is learning how to do processes. And when things change, we're going to optimize them. And like everyone is just going to learn how to do this because we're going to be a process-focused organization, right? So that's another sentiment, especially if you're growing and if you're growing quickly. People can get on board.
Yeah, one of the ones I think may work well in a larger organization, because I know this was often, I use this sometimes in the corporate setting, not necessarily just for processes, but the concept that your job, your number one responsibility in your job is to train your replacement.
Absolutely.
Because until we have your replacement trained and ready to step into that from day one, we can't promote you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. Well, this is really fascinating, Julia. I could go on geeking processes a lot more and exploring sort of some actual tactics. I sort of steered away from that because I think we'll let people contact you for more advice on that. I think that you've added so much value already, and I've learned a lot. I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask every guest. And the idea is you'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome as a result of your answer.
All right.
Right. So, what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Fail. I think that the number one thing to be more innovative is to get really comfortable with fear and failure.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I keep reminding myself whenever I kind of have this sense of, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. I sort of, okay, is that
Mm.
fear? Is that fear of failure, or is there something else going on there? And if it's just no, it's a fear of failure, change my mindset around. Let's do an experiment, because that appeals
Absolutely.
to my inner
Yeah.
scientist. I say, let's do an
Hmm.
experiment. Here's the
Let's
hypothesis.
gather
Yeah.
data. Let's...
Yeah, and let's do the experiment, gather some data, have a look at it.
Mm.
Okay, that didn't work. So what's the new hypothesis? And
Absolutely.
that was the way we did chemistry when I was doing my
Mm.
chemistry training, and never any thought about, this could go wrong. I won't do the experiment.
I love it. Yes,
Hmm,
absolutely. I think one of my favorite words is like, just test it. Just test it.
hmm. See what happens. Yeah, excellent. Well, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
um Whiteboard. I think so I whiteboard. I think there's there's a couple of things, right? I think, being able to get into flow state is really important. And I've actually taken, this um like course on flow and everything like that because I geek out on these things. But giving myself enough time to get away from the daily grind, right? And like
Hmm.
let my brain wander. Um and I get awesome ideas when I'm on airplanes, which is probably why I love to travel so much, right? And so for some people it's like when they're driving, for other people, and then it's being able to just dump those ideas somewhere and revisit them.
Hmm.
And I think that's just such a good way to innovate, is to actually let that part of your brain that has been dormant come alive into flow state and capture them wherever you are.
Hmm.
So um don't whiteboard while you're driving. But audio notes work really well while you're
Yeah,
driving,
yeah.
right?
I've discovered the audio note. I bought myself a smartwatch simply. Uh, well, I thought it was a toy. My wife had one, and she's telling me about how many steps she does every day and so on. And I thought, oh, it's a nice toy. But then I discovered that she could do audio recordings on it, and immediately I went to that, and I thought, because
Game changer.
I have ideas when I'm driving or when I'm riding my bike, and I never stop the bike to
Mm,
write it down somewhere or make a note of it. And now all
mm,
of a sudden it's just put the watch up here and audio
mm.
activate it. So, hey, open voice recorder, and then I say
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Or right before you go to bed. It's like you get an idea like right before you're like, damn it, I have to capture this.
Yeah,
So yes, absolutely.
yeah, I love it. All right. So, what's a favorite resource you use most often?
Favorite resource I use most often. I think it's a screen capture is one of my
Hmm.
favorite resources. There's like tons of resource because I'm a tech nerd. I think currently probably ChatGPT.
Yeah.
There's something called, and one of my favorite, I'll give a shout out, Grain. So out of all the note takers, which
Okay.
I've tested
Yeah.
every single one, I love Grain. Green is one of my favorite note takers because it's so good with teams, right? Like the Fathom and the Fireflies are all great for individuals, but
Hmm.
for teams, if you're going to um it's just super fast and efficient. Like if you're going to audit calls, for example, like if you're doing sales training and you're auditing sales calls, or if you're doing quality control for account management calls or consulting calls, right? Like, people on your team and they're on video, in Grain you could just go on the back, you highlight parts that you want to give feedback to, and then you can clip it, and so people could just go and like they can have basically exactly what was said, and
Hmm.
highlighted in the transcription, as well as the like the video and audio, which is just so phenomenal. You can clip different pieces and, across the customer journey, make case studies. It's just a phenomenal tool. Of all the note takers, I've been using it for like the past 4 years. And it's
Okay.
probably one of my favorite resources.
Yeah, I know I tried out Grain in the early days, but it sounds like they've come a long way since then. So to revisit that.
They've come a long way, and their AI summaries are phenomenal.
Excellent. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
Honesty. I think it's being honest with the results that you want, that they want, because sometimes these things are not the same. And making sure that you have their best interests in mind, and that you're driving towards those results. And when those results change, right, that we're having the hard conversations around, the choices that are being made, to make sure that you can be as supportive as you possibly can, and that they're
Yeah.
willing and committed to do the work.
Yeah, I love that, and focused on the outcome, as you say. It's good. Okay, now what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I think it's developing an actual point of view. I think that's a really big deal. I think a lot of marketing is copying other marketing that works.
Yeah.
And from, I think, from a mechanism standpoint, obviously we're gonna ride, those things are effective, and what converts in this. But I think having a point of view, like an actual, like, here's my expertise, here's my experience, here's how I see the world, and here's how I particularly take on, right, like what's my take on these topics, is really important, as as not only just, from a tone perspective, right, like, oh, here's my tone, or I have an authentic tone, but really having a point of view is what differentiates, I think, any individual owner from others, in the wide, market, and saturation that might exist. That's what I think.
Yeah, I love it, and having the confidence, I guess, to express that point of view and take the stand on whatever it might be, and not something just for the sake of having a different point of view, but really being authentic about the whole thing as well.
Exactly. I mean, it's not about like sensationalism or polarization, which work, right? Like, absolutely work. But, but what is your specific, based on your expertise, your experience, your view on the world? Like, what is your point of view? And I think shared, that very much differentiates, people from others, and that will attract the right type of client.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz round, and also for this wonderful conversation. It's been really great, Juliana. Now, where can people find out more about you and the work you do, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Oh, that would be lovely. And I know that as you're scaling a business, as you're innovating, it can be rather grueling, sometimes lonely, and hard. But we definitely have tons of resources, and one of the easiest things that you can do is join our newsletter. Like, once you join, we have 3 months of like really quick action steps that can make a big operational impact. And you can find those at scaletime.co/podcast/Innova.Buzz. That'll be there. And also, if you're interested to figure out, like, okay, I know my operations is good, or I know I need some work, or I think it's it's excellent, but I want to see how others are doing or how we stack up. We have a 5-minute diagnostic that uncovers 50 operational gaps and gains. We send you fancy results and let you know how you're doing on your team, your delivery, and your profitability. And we'll put that on the same page. We've done over 600 of those, so you can compare and contrast how you're doing against your peer revenue group, which is pretty fascinating because we're data nerds, obviously. And if you're interested in chatting or jumping on a call, you can find the sign up link there as well. So absolutely, we'd love to, chat with you, and it'll all be at scaleTime.co/podcast/Innova.Buzz.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks for that. And we'll have a link in the show notes for people who find that hard to remember, although it shouldn't be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. Now, what action would you like our listener to take out of our conversation today, Juliana?
I would love for them to test new things with their operations. Figure out what's working, what's not, and innovate. I actually think that processes are super sexy. And there can be tons of innovation with what is going on today in what can be optimized. So I'd love to see people really, in this climate, in this economy, figure out where they can find innovation, because that will lead to profitability, which will lead to money and choice.
Excellent. Great call to action. So thanks so much, Juliana. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thanks for sharing your insights and your wisdom and a whole lot of really actionable steps that we can take to improve our processes or start documenting them, perhaps start improving the way we document them, and the framework of the 3 steps before we optimize them, standardize them, before we standardize them, actually start to document something, start to create them, and really love that philosophy and keeping it simple. So thanks again for sharing all of that with us today, and all the best for the future. Please do stay in touch.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much.